So thanks all you for staying. So one thing we wanted to do was trying to get a discussion started about all the different issues, and some of our speakers have touched on some of the topics, and some of you as well. So for this session, I have some prepared questions. I am going to encourage y'all to bring your own questions. The mics are live. Also, for those at the table, the mics are live. And Nigel and Nicole, y'all have opportunity to pipe in. Please feel free to do that. To start off, I'll ask a question about what I saw as kind of seem a common theme in the talks, is that we're developing these methodologies to identify and extract useful information, develop models. But historically, these studies were never designed for informatics or data science. So there's issues of data quality and accessibility. And so I was wondering, and that's basically done by experimentals. So now we're having computational people in the field. So I'd like to hear on y'all's opinions on how the culture can change in science to generate data that's more structured and conducive for these modeling approaches than what we have now. So how can the field change from your perspective in academia, industry, and government? To give those 2 cents on that.
That's the problem. This doesn't work. It's not fun.
Turn it on. There should be a switch on the bottom.
On the side.
Or on the side somewhere.
Yeah, now it's. I think it went on its own. Okay, good. So I think that's the point. I mean, no data, no big data. My definition of AI is making big sense of big data. No big data. If you have an Excel sheet, forget it. If you have one type of data, forget it. It is really about tons of things. The problem starts with the availability of data. In toxicology, most work is done in industry behind firewalls. They will never share these data. The things we get from academia are first of all terribly biased towards these interesting toxic substances. All of the public databases are full of positives. And you will nicely predict that everything is positive if you have only positive information. So this is the big problem, but academically it's so difficult. Absence of evidence is no evidence of absence, so we cannot publish negative data. The regulatory databases are full of the negatives because only those make it to registration. This is exactly the complement. But we have a problem that we don't get these. This is why it was an enormous breakthrough when we got REACH, the chemical legislation in Europe, which makes at least a summary of all data available. And when we made this database machine readable in 2016, this was 80% negative chemicals. It is still in all our accumulation of databases the most important piece because it helps us to say really something is likely negative. And then we have obviously a tremendous problem, which is metadata. You will find data on the substance is classified as such, but the exact data for how this was generated are typically not associated. And this is an enormous problem, especially if you can see even in scientific publications, in the absence of reporting standards, in the absence of machine readable stuff, it is extremely difficult to find out what was the exact treatment scheme, when was something measured, what were criteria applied. So we have really to change our culture of publishing things to think that the most likely reader is no longer the PhD student for the next research project, but the most likely reader is a machine, which is trying to integrate this into the knowledge of work. And this requires a different way of providing raw data, documenting all of the manipulations of data we have been doing, and open access publishing.
I do have a point to add, although I really don't have domain knowledge in this field. But I know like AlphaFold, one of their biggest improvement was achieved when they initially trained the model and use that model to do structure prediction. And then it predicted millions of structure. And then they use this structure to train a next generation model that introduced a huge improvement. So these AI, they can really get smarter and smarter using their own prediction.
If I could add something, I'll just jump in if you can hear me, just nod.
Yeah. Thank you. So, I think that going back to the discussion that Thomas and I sort of had after my presentation, I think there's a huge role to play here for applying computational algorithms using natural language processing and machine learning in tandem to actually, extract structured information out of large unstructured data sets. I mean, so the send format that Nigel mentioned is great. It's a step in the right direction. There's, lots of other guidance documents that are focused also on in vitro experiments. So there's a good cell culture practices, GCCP 2.0 that Thomas's group led. There's a newer publication that's just coming out from a multi-organizational consortium called Responsible In Vitro Experiment Reporting, RIVER guidelines. And so these are all, great. And if you can get people to follow them, wonderful. But at the end of the day, I think the reality of the situation is that we have to develop computational methods to retrospectively sort of retrofit the data that's already out there, to process that data using natural language processing, using deep learning algorithms to extract information from the text, the tables, the figures in a way that allows it to be annotated appropriately and then assessed for quality and then fed into predictive modeling approaches, because you're just never going to get anywhere even remotely close to 100% uptake on actual standardized reporting formats outside of those that are specifically required by the regulatory agencies. Particularly in the scientific literature. And then just to go to this other point that Thomas made just now about the REACH data set, I think there's also still a really important role for machine learning algorithms to play there in identifying the data that is not high enough quality or is simply, for lack of a better word, fabricated in those data sets, because we've done a lot of curation of some subsets of the data in the REACH database, and there's just so many examples of structures that are reported as primary studies. So, oh yeah, we ran this particular animal study and we got this dose, this effect at this dose, and somehow magically very, very structurally similar compounds have the exact same dose for the exact same effect, and they are all reported as independent primary study reports when they're obviously read across. And so being able to, but then you can use a very simple cheminformatics approach to identify those, to say, compounds that are extremely structurally similar that have within, these significant digits in terms of their same low effect levels from these animal studies, these are suspicious, or these are something that should be taken with a grain of salt. And so I think there's very much a role for applying these tools to data quality assessment and data extraction and metadata annotation in a way that's just going to help improve our predictive algorithms.
I'm going to just be a little bit provocative on some of those things. I take the point that, what we're ultimately trying to avoid is repeating experiments and using animals to do that. But I do feel that some of the historical data was done at a time when the standards were different, the quality of the measurements were different, the equipment that was used to make those measurements was older. It becomes questionable as to how valuable that data really is at some point. So typically in our interactions with the FDA, for example, there is a don't go back further than 5 years to look at historical controls because you get genetic drift in the animals themselves, right? So there's an argument that you can pull out a lot of the historical data, but it's not going to help you because it's just not good enough quality. And I think the other comment I'll just make is I think how can experimentalists help? I think having people take the time to publish what the reproducibility of their experiments are. So everybody produces the positive answers and the time that it works. They don't publish the 3 times that it didn't work using the same conditions and experiments. So you don't know necessarily how good that data point actually is. Particularly with some of the new approach methodologies that are coming out, I think they can be highly variable the more complex the system.
Okay, so on that point, just hearing different conversations, so how would you incentivize experimentalists generating data that's more conducive to these AI approaches? You know, the government can do it through funding grants, something like that. You have publication issues. There's a lot of practical challenges for academia and industry. Not sure about government, but how would you incentivize the generation of better data? How would you address these kind of issues you have at hand? So maybe the old data is historically bad for different reasons, or there's certain limitations. We're moving forward, we're getting much larger data generation, as brought up before. So how to actually incentivize people to provide more negative data or reproductions of their data. So how would you incentivize that? Just wondering.
I mean, this is first of all looking forward in developing reporting standards in order to publish things completely so that others can reproduce and can also digest and crunch the numbers. In most areas, we have them. Nicole referred to some. For the animal test, there's the RIFE guidelines. There's the some of the in vitro work she mentioned. The problem is that we are not applying this. And the only things which can force this are those who are giving money, which is the big funding organizations, and it's the journals. They should not accept that something is published without these data. In toxicology, the majority of information we are using is still animal data. We only use most of the in vitro things for supportive information if we talk about regulatory toxicology. I have a view on this that there is a societal consensus in all of the developed countries that mistreating animals is not allowed. You need a very good reason to get a societal exception from this rule, which is an animal experiment. And if you get this exception from society, do something which normally is not acceptable, then you owe society the results. I think it should not be acceptable that data are not shared with the public. You might have a grace period of, we can talk about how long you might use these data internally to file your patents, develop your drugs or whatever. But in essence, we should request that people share the data because they did it on a license to kill. Yeah? And this would be an enormous starting point for making public the data to build better models and to make parts of this work in the future superfluous.
I can make a quick comment. Of course, no data, no AI, garbage in, garbage out, and also the principle is universal principle, definitely true. But this is complicated, and there is a lot of issues and prevented to have the data public available. For example, in the patient information, and it just cannot do it. I think this is being discussed in the AI community as well. That's why the federated training was coming in place. That means to push the model into the local site, you maintain the security of the data, but there's only the parameters you mentioned, and only the parameter will be exchanged between local to the server, and the master algorithm will train in the different environment. There is a lot of the sort of the technical solution and starting to be proposed, and I hope that's going to change the landscape. I will hold much more hope for the technological change than the policy change. I think a lot of the clinical data just never will be to shared. And from FDA point of view, we received a lot of the data. And I look at the same data, 48,000 rats. I tried to develop animal DNA, but I cannot because none belong to the FDA. Even though sit on the FDA's database, there's a lot of the policy, a lot of the rules behind it. And so we have data, but we just not be able to get it. So from the technology point of view, we should have developed an algorithm like a federated training or transfer learning sort of the approach to make this data invisibly accessible.
And there's two things to this. One is this idea of we regulators need to see the data sets on which the models have been trained, or we cannot accept the model, is the thinking of the 20th century. When these data were a few pages which you could actually look at. If you train something on thousands of chemicals with many, many studies, nobody will ever look into this. So no regulator should ask for having these data because they will not look into them. What we need is an explanation. What is the basis for this? What was the quality of the data? How was the curation being done? But more than this characterization is, from my point of view, not necessary, and asking for it is only delaying. The other thing is there's an interesting approach which comes from clinical medicine, which is synthetic data sets, which means to use the parameter of the actual patient group, but then scramble them, that the distribution is still maintained, but no actual patients represented. But on these synthetic data, you can train as well any type of artificial intelligence. So you're circumventing privacy issues, but you share still the distributions, what is actually needed.
Thanks. I'm gonna move on to another kind of topic, which is kind of an extension of what y'all are bringing up. And that is, it seems like historically, kind of academia and industry and government have worked separately on a lot of their own missions. But AI is kind of pushing together collaborations between different companies, whether they're AI companies, whether they're traditional drug development companies, interacting with government, and obviously academia interacting in different ways. And Senior News actually had a good article in this on July 9th about how artificial intelligence is changing drug development. So I was wondering if y'all can talk about how you see kind of collaborations that are evolving between these different branches and where they are now, where they could lead to in terms of better leveraging what AI can do to generate safer drugs or addressing toxic issues.
I mean, the first thing is we need AI literacy. We need to train people. So I think this is what academia has to do, but it has to target not only the students, the next generation, which is the prime responsibility, but we need vocational training for the regulators, the regulated communities, or these methods will not be applied. But it is a challenge for everyone. I told you, doubling in capacity every 3 months over the last 12 years. This means 8 times more powerful next year. Who can track this? Yeah, I was trying to write a summary article about AI in toxicology for the last 2.5 years, and it was permanently, oh, I have to add this new development. I have to add this. Until this summer, I decided I make it very basic and make it simple and give up on chasing the latest results. Yeah. It is really a tremendous challenge for all of us. The whole system is confronted with a technology which is changing faster than anything we have ever seen. If you see that ChatGPT was 3.5 was accepted by found 400 million users in 2 months. No technology has ever been rolled out that fast. I'm only using this example because it's a very prominent one. We need to be clear that these technologies are confronting us so fast. We need lighthouse function, mainly, I think, by academia to convey this and educate on this.
Now, one thing, just to comment on that, I was in a bioinformatics meeting on a panel session. They were talking about one of the issues at academia is that there's challenges in the bottlenecks of getting people moving the field because they can make a lot more money somewhere else than being a professor at an institution training future people in the field. So there was a kind of a challenge that's kind of growing so fast, it's hard trying to get people correctly trained.
I had a PhD student bought out of my lab just a year before she would have finished. Yeah, but there was so much money that it was then more appealing. And I think that's a big challenge. Yeah, yeah, sure, academia is nice. I love it, but it is certainly not competitive when it's about salaries. So you're pointing to something really important.
Well, you're not, Thomas, you're not the only person that has that problem, right? I think even the pharma industry is struggling to hold on to people with things like Netflix and Facebook and Twitter and all of the rest offering sort of what I would almost be ridiculous salaries to people coming out of college with a data science background. It's really hard to recruit good people.
I would venture to say though that the pendulum is in the midst of swinging back the other way when it comes to, I mean, so think about the graph that Thomas showed and think about sort of the achievements of large language models in terms of replicating what humans are able to do. And I think something that no one could have predicted 5 years ago is the fact that programming, like actual, writing code, is all of a sudden a rapidly dying profession. I mean, this is something where like these models will replace humans to a large extent in an unbelievably short period of time. I mean, I think there's always going to be a role for people who, in terms of designing the need for codes, but you're going to get much closer to plain language coding much more quickly, right? And so you'll just have algorithms that can actually write the code for you. You won't actually know how to have to know how to do that yourselves. And so I think that there might be an opportunity right now in the biological sciences, in biomedical research, in toxicology, in sustainable chemistry, in drug design, to actually start to recruit the best and brightest minds back with this promise of, not just salary, but actually making a difference and actually thinking about how to leverage these technologies in the smartest way possible and just incorporate them into your toolbox, but thinking about problems much more comprehensively and bringing in biology and chemistry and computer science in a way that humans, I think, are still far more capable of doing than machines are.
To put some data behind this, a year ago, 40% of coding was done by AI. This year it's at 80. In the tech industry, in here, the Bay Area, has laid off in fall of this year until early this year. I think in total 30% of their people, but 20% of their coders, which means that something which was really a rare commodity is suddenly something which is downsized. Yeah. So there's Nicole has a very important argument here. Don't know whether they can become the AI teachers of the future, but at least there's certainly potential of computationally educated people to go in the downstream areas of the workforces. Yeah.
To follow up on that, is thinking about also about opportunities. So coders are, maybe generalizing, maybe they're dying out or just transitioning to a different kind of career. So what are opportunities that are being created for people, especially people who are entering in the toxicology field now, students and postdocs? What's a place for them that's going to be created within, say, the next few years, 10 years? What are the job opportunities?
Not AI. That's probably one sentence.
No, I mean, we are not really well prepared for the AI revolution. Our data are scarce and messy and not easily accessible. We have much more problems of paywalls for data than other areas. We have a disconnect between the animal and the human, which is enormous because toxicology is having tremendous problems to predict human outcomes. There's still many years to come where the creation of data, the acquisition of data, and also the production of data is actually still tremendously important. And I think we will, for a long time, more identify things which smell like problem and then request actual studies which are trying to find out, is this true or is it not true, which will be necessary. And we also have one thing we need to keep in mind. It is not only about producing data for regulators and regulatory decisions, it is also a lot about liability, especially here in the US. So we will enter a phase for decades probably, where the question will be, are these decisions which are AI-based defendable in court? All these liability cases, I have been damaged by. We will see an enormous wave, because it will be very easy in the future to make predictions about the carcinogenicity of the food additives or whatever. How many people will be prompted to say it was this food which produced my cancer, and this is why I go to court? And we will need a completely different workforce helping to sort out what is true, what is not, and defend the industries against possible claims resulting from the easy rollout of these technologies.
So to paraphrase, Thomas, it's go to law school, become a lawyer. That's the career of the future, right?
I mean, I think that, you know, there's still so much to be done in not just the toxicology space, but also the biomedical research space in terms of taking an integrated approach. So having approaches that actually bring in silico, not just AI and machine learning, but systems models. So there's so much that we still don't understand about human biology and human physiology. And, you know, how does Alzheimer's disease progress? How to actually treat neurological disorders. There's a ton of promise in using human-based, complex, three-dimensional, you know, organ equivalent systems in combination with artificial intelligence and computational systems biology models in a way that is iterative and mutually informative. And to me, you know, it sounds a bit like, you know, advising everyone to become a Renaissance scientist and understand, you know, all of these fields, but that's actually where I see the true future of biomedical research is in actually the intersection between all of those technologies.
I just wrote my opinion on it, and in my short lifetime, I see a lot of the new technologies, right? So during the 90s, QSAR was like the magic bullet to resolve all the drug development situations, but over the time, we see that the initial the euphoria give away. For the reality, the QSAR just cannot solve every questions that we have. Now we have a revamp of the QSAR based on the deep learning. I think that it's just going to have a comeback. During the 20s, when the bioinformatics come on board, and we have a very similar yawning about the lack of the student really take on these jobs. And suddenly, university all have the bioinformatics course by that time. And at FDA, we even have the bioinformatics governing board. Anything use the computer called the bioinformatics. So I think now we have AI and machine learning. I think we need to give a little bit more time. And I know the force come the AI and machine learning, in particular ChatGPT, is a living demonstration, the power of the AI. We feel this is finally coming, something is real, but we still need to give a little bit more time and to understand, using the FDA words, for the fit for purpose applications. And George Box said it very well, all the models is wrong, but some may be useful.
I mean, I have a very simple worldview. Everything I really want to know about toxicology, I don't get from the methods we have at the moment. I don't get the long-term low dose. I don't get mixtures. I don't get an understanding why some individuals are showing disease effects while others are don't. So personalized type of toxicology. So there's no other way. There's no other way than employing computational approaches to help with the big questions. Yeah? And for this reason, I think I see mostly the potential, and we need to unleash this. We need to enable this. I think not doing it is disastrous. We are killing people. We're letting people die where we might be able to find things, where we might to find the real problems. Where we are not spending 10,000 studies on BPA, but where we are really identifying the problems.
Shift to another topic, and it's kind of extension of going beyond what we're doing and thinking about who we're serving. And that one of the challenges in the field, and some of you have alluded to it, is the fact of kind of accessibility and confidence from people not in the field to use these tools and actually implement them. And there's kind of a separate but related ones for like accessibility. I mean, that's a practical issue. Data myself, but back when I was in grad school, that's where the rate limiting step was going to the library and getting a paper you needed. So the information was there. Now there's information and it's everywhere and you're drowning in it. So people who are not in the field trying to find what they need is a significant challenge. And then when they find a bunch of examples of, say, tools in the toolbox, how they actually get confident in it to actually make a decision versus just getting a lot of predicted possibilities and then leaving it that. And so I was wondering if y'all could address issues kind of accessibility and confidence for the users of these models to actually make decisions on what they're doing.
I think that the journal was doing a really good job, even though it's a slow comment, but they do asking every algorithm needed to be deposited in the GitHub, allow people to sort of download the algorithm, including the data, and so your results can be reproduced. Is that there is a fault in there? Of course, there always, but some of the algorithm has been used for some other purpose. And the GAN model is a very good example. And in the 2016, when the Goodfellow published the paper, deposited the model in the GitHub, and there's a Swiss student from Sorbonne University and download the algorithm and generated the painting and sold in New York in the auction for over $400,000. And now we get into the problem is what's the IP issues? Is that belong to the Goodfellow? He published that paper, or that guy was sort of to get the painting sold for that much more money? And they have a lawsuit in the Florida right now trying to get resolved. So scientists embrace the openness. There's no question about it, because the only openness will bring us to the next levels. But a lot of the commercial and other entity, and we in the FDA, we even have the technical transfer office and safeguarding, looking very closely everything we do, and under certain level of the protections. So there is some sort of force to impact the reproducibility and availability in all these algorithms.
I understood your question a bit differently, yeah?
Well, yeah, so for example, if I had a question about styrene, I want to know if it's toxic. I can go on the internet and find a bunch of models, maybe, and that kind of practical application. People not, because it is a small community. I think you might have mentioned earlier. What about the greater community?
I mean, what you see at the moment is that if you had this problem, styrene toxicity, a year or two ago, you would Google it. Yeah, if you're part of the general public, you find several things, and you have to sort out which one you want to trust. And most people pick the one which would fit their prejudice. Yeah? And it was very difficult for a layperson to understand what is a trusted resource and what is not. They could probably see what is a popular resource, because that's the order Google is largely applying. The appeal of things like ChatGPT and others is they give you an answer which is probably right, but they eliminate all of the things we scientists do. They eliminate the sources, they eliminate all of the doubt, all of the things, yeah, but there's also this opportunity, this possibility. They make the world incredibly simple and seem to have the right answer, and often they have it. But it is not sufficient for us for scientific discourse. We need not to trust. Science is not a religion. We need to instill in our students and in the discourse we have in science, we always need to instill the questioning, is it really true? This is not, at the moment, these tools are not developed for this purpose. I think they can. Explainable AI will be something like this because it will give you the other opportunities, the less likely answers to your question, if you understand why it came to this answer. And this is the next step. AI is made by scientists, but not yet for scientists.
I will add to this, and this is certainly my bias coming through in terms of where I sit, but this is the role of government as well. I mean, the government is funded by the taxpayers. We have a responsibility to deliver trustworthy, reliable information to the public. And so the FDA, the National Toxicology Program, the NIH system of institutes, the CDC, OSHA, these are organizations that if you find information on their databases, on their websites, that should be information that you can trust. And there are numerous, maybe too many, depending on who you ask, quality control systems and quality assurance steps in place to ensure that the data that these organizations are putting out is trustworthy. It doesn't mean that it's always 100% consistent because it's complicated, and a lot of it, as we talked about previously, is not always reproducible, but having transparent, high access to high quality data, and even though we have to be careful about this, having sort of guidance on how to interpret that data is, I think, the responsibility of public health organizations that are fundamentally governmental in nature. And of course, there are checks and balances there too. All government organizations have external advisory boards, boards of scientific counselors, advisory committees that are made up of academics, of stakeholders from industry, from non-governmental organizations that provide that review and that assessment and that sort of independent counterbalance. But that's exactly what we're trying to do with ICE, for example. I mean, we're a small organization. I only have 25 people in my group, but we've put a lot of resources into creating an access point to high quality, trustworthy data and models.
In our school, we have a lot of discussions about making a required course of how to use ChatGPT and critically interpret its answers. It never happened, but I think it should happen rather soon.
I think what Nicole just said is making resources available. This is something we also should mention here explicitly. I think one of the really almost defining characteristics of AI is how open it is. I mean, see these tremendously important developments, and they are in part instantly made publicly available, many of them for free or for relatively small amounts of money. This is an enormously democratizing tool. It is something which is giving equity to poorer countries, developing countries. People can develop science based on AI. They can learn and study. They get access to information in an unprecedented way. The educational power of AI is only starting to be explored. We are organizing medical knowledge through these systems in completely new ways that you can have your pocket doctor. I don't say that as a physician myself, I don't say you should use this instead of a physician. But if you're in a situation where you don't have access to high quality medical help, it might be better than nothing. Or the doctor who is working under less access to knowledge, under pressure of answering very quickly, giving the best possible solution, not the best solution at this moment, is perhaps served very well with these. So the transformative power for the entire healthcare system, not just for toxicology, I think should not be underestimated. And this sharing character, the openness internationally, I think is most important.
So I think there's some final points in some of that. I mean, comes back to sort of what I would call the ethical use of AI. I think as a community, we have some responsibilities to think about how we apply it and how we educate people on its limitations as much as how, I mean, we talk about how well it performs, but we don't always talk about when does it not perform well. And I think that's where we can sometimes get caught out a little bit in some of these efforts that, you know, that something goes wrong, you know, the self-driving car drives a family of four over a cliff, you know, the times that things go horribly wrong, we don't necessarily put our hands up and say, well, there's, you know, there's some limitations there. And I think there's also, we need to educate people that machines aren't necessarily perfect. Right? Because, you know, you don't want a doctor prescribing a medication based on a prompt from an AI system without actually sort of thinking about what he's doing. Because we've seen it with facial recognition software, that is not infallible. It can get it wrong. And so I think we've got to bear in mind that these things can, whilst they're great tools, they are just tools. Right? They don't replace the human interaction, the human thought process in that step.
They're decision support systems. They're not deciding systems. They must not be, certainly not at this stage. And then there's terrible examples. Yeah? I mean, IBM Watson, one of the first things they did was advising physicians on how to treat cancer patients. And they would have killed patients if the physicians would not have been alert. So we must be skeptical, like with every tool. But if I compare the situation where a physician on average reads one scientific paper per week, but would need 2 to 3 per patient he's treating in order to find the best advice, something which is giving on a silver platter this information to take into account and judge then, is it good advice, is it applicable advice for this patient? That's at the moment such an improvement over the actual situation.
Yeah, this is a question for the audience. Please go to the mic because there's people online. Thank you.
Just on the whole education thing, I might just give my perspective on being a student of computational toxicology. From what I've learned and from all the research that I've done, it's actually relatively very easy to build a machine learning model. If you Google or YouTube how to make a machine learning model, there are hundreds and hundreds of articles, videos that have been made by many people on how to just easily whip up a machine learning model very easily in 20 lines of code. Pretty much anyone could do it at that point. I think my comment is just in terms of educating the next generation, it would be more of, yeah, viewing machine learning algorithms as a tool, but then ensuring that the scientist in the student is able to correctly use biomedical data and formulate a problem around something that can be solved, if you will, with machine learning. That's just my comment at this year.
I agree completely. For toxicology, I made one experience which has blown me away, which is 5 years ago, we released 2 classes on toxicology, on modern toxicology on Coursera. These classes have been taken by almost 20,000 students in these 5 years. Absolutely for free, yeah, out of Stanford, Coursera. There's an enormous opportunity in teaching things. We cannot expect that each and every university will have top AI professors which are going to teach the community. With this pace, we need to find ways of disseminating these things differently. And we also need to think about teach the teacher. If I look into the catalog of Coursera and others, there's everything. You don't need to go to YouTube where you might have a good teacher or not. There's higher quality stuff available. But it is really getting simpler and simpler, also because of the user interfaces being a very important part of the development. If you would need to code in order to run ChatGPT, you would not have 400 billion, but perhaps 400 users in 2 months. Yeah? This is the enormous difference that things are deployed now in a way that people can actually use them and can play around, yeah, and find their ways.
Any questions? Oh, yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I have just to follow up on that, as someone in academia, what sources would you recommend to learn and teach our colleagues about AI? Because it seems like the biggest concern now is, oh, students are using it to cheat, basically. And so a lot of academics are saying, I want nothing to do with AI. I don't want to engage. So how do we change the mindset, and where can people learn more about how to use it responsibly?
I don't want to take every question. I like it to some extent. The first things I think the AI is to some extent, first of all, the solution to one of the biggest problems which we have, which is information flooding. Yeah? I mean, we are all suffering from the amount of things we are getting. And just the capability of summarizing whatever document in a few lines and doing this pretty precisely is a godsend. Yeah. So I think we should encourage everyone, not necessarily to trust them. Better than not reading it, it's better to have a summary which is 95% correct. Yeah? This is already for us academics something. This, you don't need to be trained on this. But there is increasingly teaching. We have created in our department, for example, an AI interest group where those interested in AI came together. We had regularly people talking. Nicole was one of our speakers, and just trying to help them how, in our case, environmental health and engineering, how what are the developments? It is not easy to maintain something like this, but there's increasingly these structured offers. The classes on, I don't want to, don't get money from Coursera. Yeah? Just giving this as one example, they're fantastic. Yeah? You can get essentially a degree in AI by putting some of these classes together. And even YouTube has very informative stuff, but it's more difficult to find guidance on where this is. There's also interesting opportunities with some of these newsletters. There are certain people who are compiling these developments in very compressed format. It makes it quite easy to monitor the developments in the AI field.
So with my student, so now his learning procedure is like this, like he would first ask a chat. Chat didn't give a satisfactory answer, he asked me. And frequently he had come to ask me, I may first ask a chat. He will see I have to chat. And I said, oh, chat didn't give a quick answer. Then we go to look for papers and read Alex code. So.
You should say beside chat, there's Bart from Google's, and there is Llama from Meta, and there's Claude and whatever. There's 1,000 systems. It's not only chat, it's only the most prominent one.
Yeah, I know in our bioinformatics department, they've been having discussions about chat and actually ChatGPT and how to actually incorporate it in the teaching, because it's one of those where they're going to have access to it. So either teach them how to use it, or they're going to use it and you're not going to be happy that they're using it. So that's actually what y'all are talking about. They're using it to summarize information, because I usually pepper them with questions about AI and how I can use it in my lab. And they'll use ChatGPT to give me answers. Does that make sense to you? Because it's probably about 95% correct.
This interaction of the student with the professor in chat made me think, is there any applet that would maybe initiate a conversation between chat and Bard and have them talk? Is there any platform for that?
They would find the Holy Grail, yeah. No, I mean you should be clear, they cannot know anything which is not in the data, yeah. So, and being trained on something as imperfect as the internet of 2021, which is the main source at the moment, is not the end solution. But it is showing us already what you can get only from such a source, yeah. And the fact that, well, I found it fascinating that GPT-3 to GPT-4 was trained on the same data set. It was only the improvement of the algorithms. There was no difference. It was only, but it was trained on 1 million more variables. And this is, so it is really a lot is in the technology, not only the database. It's not only the quality of the data, but also how we squeeze sense out of it.
All right now, I want to move to our next thing, an exciting thing. Unfortunately, Nicole and Nigel will join us. We're going to have a social, so we can keep this conversation going. We're going to be meeting in the mission room, which is 1 floor down. Sorry, oh, you're better direction than I am.
First of all, I want to thank Grover. I want to thank all the panelists and everyone for giving their impressions and opinions, and please join me in thanking them all. Guys, and yes, I'm really happy to buy all of you a drink if you'd like. It's going to be just down the halls, this floor, currently this fall, past the elevators or through the elevators. And if you see me, I have the magic yellow ticket, so I will give you a few. So yeah, so thanks to everybody, and thanks Nicole and Nigel online. So take care, everyone.
Thank you. Karen.